I am Dave Frishberg, and I'm a pianist, and that's mainly what I think of myself as.
Wheeling and dealing in various large and small things, lying and stealing and letting the chips just fall, signing and sealing.
Let me begin by saying I started playing the piano by copying records of my brother's collection, and the guys that I copied were Pete Johnson, Albert Ammons, and Meadlux Lewis, and then the lesser-known boogie-woogie piano players. I was just entranced with boogie-woogie. I'm talking about when I was 12, 13, 14 years old. I was just playing those records, trying to copy them exactly. And Mort, my brother, showed me how to play what the blues was, and he showed me how it was built with the 1 chord and the 4 chord and the 5 chord, and I don't remember what terminology he used, but I learned about that. I could play the blues in F and C and G, and I was satisfied. That's all I wanted to do. There were other things I was interested in doing besides that, besides playing the piano. And when I sat down at the piano, I could play boogie-woogie. And I was pretty good at it. I really was. I was a natural at it. And I met a guy, a bebop piano player, much older than I. He must have been nearly 30. And he was a professional bebopper in Minneapolis. And one of the working jazz musicians in town, he said, I don't want to teach you to play. You can play, but I can show you some things about music. And he said something so interesting to me then, and I was just a kid. He said, I'll show you some things about music so that you learn to use the piano as a tool. And very interesting. And so I said, good. And he taught me, the very first lesson he taught me was the minor 7th chord. I was playing dominant 7ths. I knew how to handle them in the blues. And he showed me how to play the blues by inserting that minor 7th chord when it resolves back into the last 4. Something went off in my brain. The whole thing connected with me so quickly. I immediately grasped what he was talking about. The concept of the 2 chord going to the 5 chord to the 1 chord. 18th century harmony. And wow, it made so much sense to me and thrilled me so much that I taught myself, he taught me maybe a dozen lessons, and then he was gone in the night. I didn't know him after that. But just from those things that he showed me, he opened up the world of music to me, and it was clear as crystal to me. When I got old enough to go to the university and take courses in music theory, I just ate it up because it was what Jimmy was teaching me, that had taught me back in my younger years, So I learned about that, and it all came very easy to me. And that I consider one of the big turning points in my life, because I liked songs, but all I could play with was the blues. But now Jimmy had given me a tool by which I could play songs that sounded more like pop music. He showed me what 2-5-1 sounded like, and how you use that, and the relative minor, and things like that, and conventions of substituting chords by using the chord that descended from a half tone above, putting that in instead of the 5 chord. These were all the rules of modern jazz thinking. Bebop, I guess, if you will, which was just I'm talking about 1948, 49. Charlie Parker records were new. And he played me the 78s of Charlie Parker. He also played me some 78s of Bud Powell. And I forgot all about Meadlux Lewis and Pete Johnson. And I was into bebop. I was teaching myself to be a bebop player. So that I consider one of the big turning points in my life. Learning how to play songs with chord substitutions. which essentially was what bebop was about. Or how to screw around with songs, and distort them in a way where they became private property almost, I went for it. So that turned my musical self on, and I came to life as a would-be musician. And the next big turning point had to be when I got to New York and began to play jam sessions. I had a day job when I got to New York after I got out of the Air Force. Well, I had to have a day job to stay in New York, but I did join the union right away, the Musicians Union, and began to take gigs around New York, but they weren't jazz gigs. They were just dumb club dates and whatever I could find. I didn't know anybody in town, really. But I found this loft on 6th Avenue and 28th Street, something like that. It was the loft that belonged to the photographer Eugene Smith. And Hall Overton was living in that apartment. It wasn't an apartment building. It was a kind of an old tenement building on 6th Avenue. And you had to walk up three flights to get to these lofts. Very funky lofts. But on the 3rd floor there was a beautiful grand piano, and that belonged to Hall Overton, and another beautiful grand up on the 4th floor. Little did I know that on the 5th floor, Eugene Smith had suspended microphones and was recording all this stuff. They had jam sessions going on 24 hours a day in this loft. The inhabitants of the loft at that time were Ronnie Free, a wonderful drummer, probably the best drummer I ever played with in my life, who was probably 18 or 19 years old at that time. And the other was Al Haig, who was living there. Al Haig, one of the great characters of jazz, one of the best pianists that ever lived in the jazz world. Also a character. And it was at that loft, going to those all-night sessions, I got to play with the best musicians. I didn't know who they were. I knew their names. Some of them were well known. And I got to play with these professional musicians, professional jazz musicians, and that really was the second turning point of my life. And when I decided I really want to do this is what I want to do, and this is why I came to New York, and the hell with the day jobs. And I quit, and I began to work every night as a musician after that. And for 15 years, I was practically steadily employed in New York. I did work a lot. It all worked out. But I remember it was going to that loft that I felt my feelings about music as a career they took shape up there. There was no longer any doubt in my mind whether I wanted to be a professional musician or not. It was a tough, competitive world, and everyone, including my dad, would tell me how it's a tough life and all that, and I was ready for it. I wanted it. And what hit me was, this is what it feels like to play with really good musicians. It was a great treat for me, and a great nourishing experience for me as a musician to get to play with them and to listen to the other piano players and to be accepted among them. It was a great feeling, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I'm going to be a piano player for the rest of my life, and that's what happened. Click.
Wheeling and dealing in various large and small things, lying and stealing and letting the chips just fall, signing and sealing and knowing the price of all things and the value of nothing at all.